Welcome to the machine overview of the Ultimaker S5 3D printer. I'm assuming if you're on this video right now, you've already been through our 3D printer slicer training, so this is part 2 of the online version of the training, where we talk about the machine itself. A few rules before you enter the shop. One of them includes wearing closed-toed shoes, and the other is wearing full pants, of course. We do require safety glasses, but that's only for specific zones in this shop. So luckily for the 3D printer itself, we don't require safety glasses. So this is the Ultimaker S5, and as you can see that from the first glance itself, you see there's a small interface screen. We also see there's a build plate where you'll see all your prints, obviously printing, of course. And we have a print head where your filaments are going to be extruding out and they're going to be printing your entire design. When you come in person for your training, we will explain to you that there are very specific types of materials that we're allowed to use in this shop. Specifically for this printer, we're only allowed to use PLA, and just for more important information, the thickness of the filament is 2.85. Normally, the first thing we do is just insert it into the USB slot. And before we actually start printing your design, there's a few options you can mess around with, which obviously you have to do before you start your print. The first option obviously shows ready to print, which means that you can select your design from the USB itself. But before you do so, you have to obviously load and unload your filament. And how you do that is you select the second button, where it leads you to a bunch of options. You don't have to worry about the print core, so we usually mess around with the materials, which is the first two buttons. You can select either, but normally, and in the training, we obviously select first print material, where you have 3 options, which is load, unload, and change. And obviously, to load your material, you press the load button. The idea is, normally once the loading is complete, like right now, this is where you're supposed to place your spool. And once your spool has been placed into the slot behind the printer, you click confirm. Again, if you're purchasing your filament, it should look something like this. As you can see, it says it's PLA and the thickness is 2.85 mm. So this sort of spool is what we can approve to load into the printer. But before we actually load the filament into this, there's certain things about the backside of this printer that you do have to understand when you're loading in the filament. As it was shown on the screen earlier, there were 2 extruder options, number 1 and number 2, and this is where you can see extruder 1 and extruder 2. It is always easier to start with number 1. So these slots in the back are meant to put your filament spools in so you can slide them in very easily. And then once you have your filament in your hand, you should put them through this extruder box, and as you can see, it's very simple and it's not too complicated. But before you put in your filament into the extruder box, it's important to see this tab on the side and make sure that it is unlocked. This tab is connected to a gear on the inside that pushes your filament through, and you can just put your filament inside this little hole you can see on the bottom. You can push it till this zip tie that we have as a reference for people. And then once you push your filament through, you can basically close the tab, and you can see it's locked in place, so now it's not going to move, and the machine does the rest once you load the filament. So once your filament is loaded into the extruder box, or we can come back to the interface here and we can select the material that we're using. Obviously, as I explained earlier, we're only using one type of filament, which is PLA, and there's only one button that says PLA, so that's the one we select, and we click confirm, and it should take you back to insert materials, where it asks you, are you sure you're putting in the right material? And obviously at this point you should, and we click confirm. And eventually you should be able to hear a small high-pitched noise. I was told you can reference it to the Iron Man noise, so you should be able to hear something like that, which normally takes a few minutes, but once it does, you'll see that the filament is pushing through the tube itself, and it's going to go through the extruder itself. So now your filament's all loaded in, and now it's time to start your file. We go back to the first button that I initially told you about, and we'll see it says select from USB, And since your file is inside the USB drive, you select this button. So among the files that's there in the USB drive, it sets it in order from recent upload to oldest. So normally, if you had just uploaded your file, it should be the first file in the list in the USB. And then you just select your file, and then it goes through a small calibration setting. And then once it goes through that, it starts your print. Once you selected your file, all you have to do is start your print. The machine will go through a small calibration, and then it will begin your print. We expect every user to at least watch the first layer for any errors. Thank you for watching the machine overview video of the Ultimaker S530 printers.